Digital El Diario and Archival Justice in the Digital Humanities Graduate Classroom. Hello, I'm Juan García Fernández, a PhD student in Spanish Literature and Cultural Studies at the University of Colorado Boulder.
Hello, I'm Nickoal Eichmann-Kalwara. I'm an assistant professor and digital scholarship librarian in the Center for Research Data and Digital Scholarship at the University of Colorado Boulder. We would like to acknowledge that the University of Colorado sits on the traditional territories of the Arapaho, Cheyenne, and Ute nations, as well as the historical territory of Aztlán.
Today we will be presenting about the project Digital El Diario. The corpus of this project that we developed with other colleagues at CU is based on El Diario de la Gente, an independent newspaper published for and by Chicano students at the University of Colorado Boulder between 1972 and 1983. El Diario was then edited and published within the context of the general development of the Chicano movement in the US. Although El Diario mainly focused on the particular issues that affected the Chicano community of the Boulder and Denver area directly, it also includes other topics related to the general movement, such as national Chicano leaders' activity or diverse judges' rulings on important policies for the community. As Nickoal will now explain, every step of this transdisciplinary project was centered on the ideas of historical recovery and archival justice for this particular instance of the Chicano movement, for which we also consider the different values and methods of digital humanities.
As Juan mentioned, we're presenting on Digital El Diario. This project was the result of a semester-long graduate course, Digital Humanities 5000, which is an introduction to digital humanities, methods, movements, and tools. And in this project, we took the corpus of El Diario de la Gente and conducted several readings, and again, resulted into this final project. Within the course, from its inception, it was designed to be focused on historical recovery and archival justice, which is sort of central to digital humanities. Thank you, Juan. And transformative digital humanities, what we mean by that is digital humanities that does something for good. So in this case, we were hoping to be able to conduct archival justice. In other words, by addressing the history of the Chicano student movement on our campus, that we could uncover information and ideas, and again, to raise the voices of the students who are part of that movement at the time. It was also a very transdisciplinary activity. We had about 15 students in the class and very few overlapped in terms of their domains. As I mentioned, archival justice and historical recovery are pretty central to the class itself. And by conducting corpus building around El Diario de la Gente and addressing a variety of digital humanities values and methods, we were able to sort of scaffold those into our practice. Specifically decided to look at El Diario de la Gente because it was recently digitized by the Colorado Historic Newspaper Collection. In addition to that, there's sort of a confluence of events on campus, including the commemoration of Los Seis de Boulder, which were students that were murdered during the Chicano student rights movement in 1974, and their murders remain unsolved. So in a sense, we're also doing historical recovery, that there are these events and issues that even native Coloradans or people who went to University of Colorado in the 70s and 80s remain unaware of. So in that sense, we're conducting historical recovery, again, raising the voices of those who had been previously unheard. And in the class, we focused on a variety of values that complemented the idea of archival justice and historical recovery. And that included indigenous digital humanities, feminist digital humanities, Black digital humanities, among others, and queer digital humanities. And so by looking at our corpus through this lens, we were able to take a closer look and be able to sort of care for our corpus in different ways. So we started the class by creating the corpus itself And throughout the course, we interrogated the corpus through analyzing it with various DH methods, including text mining, geospatial methods, and digital storytelling. And that sort of resulted in the final project.
All of these aspects and dimensions of archival justice and historical recovery that Nickoal just mentioned and that we studied and discussed during the course last year helped me as a student that was starting in the field to consider the different ways in which we could develop the project, and as well as to constantly re-examine our specific goals, methods, and values. Similarly, during the development of Digital El Diario, it was also very helpful that everyone involved came from different disciplines of study. This again allowed us to engage in a transdisciplinary discussion that helped us determine the following steps and phases of the project. Since the different perspectives that everyone had on the topic contributed to shape more precisely the methods and purposes of the work. For me specifically, the course and the project helped me find another way of doing scholarship work within the humanities, as it offered me new methods and values that I could apply to the text with which I work, and that is still not common or even in my field. Regarding the beginning of the project and the creation of the Corpus El Diario, the text and images were collected from the digitalized version of the newspaper that we can find in the Colorado Historic Newspaper Collection Database, as Nickoal previously mentioned. Each member of the project worked on solving the OCR issues and classified them in 4 different sections for the corpus: advert, articles, creatives, and notice.
And from all of those different types of articles that we ended up pulling together, we divided up into several groups based on our interests, and again, sort of built in this final website. And we had 5 different readings. One of the first readings speaks to specifically Los Seis de Boulder, and looking at the newspapers and the way that they represented the students who were involved and had been murdered in 1974, and in particular how that had an effect on the Chicano community. We also had a reading using topic modeling, which Juan will go into more detail, again using text mining approaches in order to read the entire corpus of articles and creatives of El Diario. We also had an analysis of looking at just the creative works in El Diario. There's a variety of poems and sketches and other artwork that served as ways of communicating a variety of different issues and values of the Chicano student community. And so we had one group who looked at the creative writings and artwork in particular. And we also had a group look at the poetics of the Chicano student activists, and in particular looking at discourses as they related to Jorge Gonzalez's poem, Yo Soy Juan. And then there's the final reading on land rights struggles.
Oh, sorry.
Right, so this speaks to current and past issues related to Chicano and indigenous land rights struggles. And so the students compared sort of the dominant talks about land rights in the 1970s and thinking about how that relates to land rights struggles today.
For the specific project that I and my colleague Eva Danayanti completed, we applied text and... Oh, sorry.
Right, so this speaks to current and past issues related to Chicano and indigenous land rights struggles. And so the students compared sort of the dominant talks about land rights in the 1970s and thinking about how that relates to land rights struggles today.
For the specific project that I and my colleague Eva Danayanti completed, we applied the text analysis method. In our work, we argue that given the circumstances in which El Diario was published, the use of text analysis tools such as Manuel or Juan would allow us to define the way in which Chicano students portrayed and discussed their experience as college students in their articles, and more precisely, how this experience was mediated by their relationship with the university administration. Examining the experience of Chicano community members in higher education has been fundamental for scholars that have tried to explain the state and development of the community in the United States. So with our work, we wanted to contribute to that discussion with a new perspective on this instance of the Chicano movement. Scholars such as Arce had argued, for example, that the relationship between the individual and the institution administration was the factor in which the student persistence at the university was funded. Likewise, Lopez had claimed that the lack of representation of Chicano history in the academic curriculum, as well as the lack of Chicano professors on campus, are the main challenges to the development of these students. Following these previous studies, Eva and I could see with the results of the topic modeling tool MALET that the Chicano students who wrote for El Diario already understood these issues as the main challenges they had to face during their education. Focusing exclusively on the section of articles of the corpus, we could see how in El Diario they discussed students' attempts at institutional changes and at the design of a curriculum that developed Chicano identity. In fact, the inaugural number that covers students' government elections reflects on the importance of having representation in administration, not only for these students, but for every minority group on campus. Having representation in the student government was then a pivotal change for the future of the movement. Based on the list of topics provided by Male, we found that other central concerns for the Chicano students were to ensure financial aid in order to continue their education at the University of Colorado, to demonstrate and help Chicano professors obtain their tenure, and finally, to fight to be represented in the university curriculum and expand the number of courses on Chicano culture and history by consolidating a strong Chicano program. Furthermore, by exploring the articles that Male identified as the most relevant for each one of these topics, we could examine and understand in more detail how the relationship between the student and administration was perceived, described, and articulated by their editors. With a similar approach, we use the text analysis tool of Juan in order to analyze how the relevance of this topic changed over time within the area, and how the relationship within the university evolved throughout the years. This study proves how this type of analysis and methods can explain questions about this form of cultural production as well. By presenting and determining the particular concerns of the Diario editors and writers, we hope to bring into academic research and conversation the contribution of these students to the general Chicano movement of the 70s and the early 80s.
Digital El Diario took place in the confines of a single semester course, and there still remains a lot of work to be done. For one, while we have the standalone project of our various readings, we created a computationally ready, or mostly ready, corpus of all of the articles in El Diario. However, that still needs work. We have had some encoding issues between many of us working between different systems as we created the corpus. And as related to that, we have a variety of optical character recognition cleaning to still do. So there's a lot of care work that we would like to continue with this project as thinking about it as collections of data, but also continuing that archival and historical recovery. The corpus itself is the first time that we have all of these newspaper articles available in a machine actionable ready space. I feel like I should also mention that the newspaper itself, and being digitized by the Colorado newspaper, historical newspaper collection, that this is the first time also that the newspaper has been available in a central place. In its analog form, it has been spread out among a variety of different libraries and archives. And that has a lot to do with some of the tensions that Juanma has addressed with the university administration and the Chicano community at large. So now we finally have this collection together. And this is one of the first, this project is one of the first scholarly investigations of El Diario de la Gente. So we would like to, as Juanma said, that we would like to encourage people to reuse the corpus to help us clean it if they're interested, but also to engage more with the community and incorporate their readings of the corpus itself in relation to their own experiences.
Thank you. To see the project, you can go to digitalldiario.com.